It is Wednesday night, and that means Mr. Ryan Talbot. It is the live edition of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. I am Matt Parrino. We are from Syracuse.com and NewYorkUpstate.com. And the live show tonight, it's going to be a fun one because, Ryan, we have now 8 practices to kind of look back on after a summer and a spring filled with anticipation for what this thing's going to look like. And now we have a good, solid body of work that we can really dive into. And we'll get a chance to do that with Jay Skurski from the Buffalo News, who will be joining us. He's running a few minutes late, but he will be here any minute. Ryan, how are you, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing great. And I think you said it well. You know, right now there's at least a base from what we've seen from this team through a week plus of practice. So you guys that are there day in, day out, you probably have a pretty decent feel for who's on the inside right now and who's on the outside looking in, so to speak. So I definitely think that tonight's going to be an interesting conversation one night before they hold a scrimmage.
So the coolest thing about the live show is that this is your show, and we want to keep it that way. I know we've been having some great day of practice podcast, and the interaction has been great with you guys in the comments. If you have something you want us to talk about, please feel free to drop that in the comments, and we will hit that over the course of the show. Jay Skurski put out a 53-man roster earlier this week, and we're going to dive into that quite a bit. Pretty similar to the one that I put out right before camp start. Couple differences. We'll talk about that and maybe where we're starting to see some changes. We'll talk about camp risers and guys that have maybe fallen off a little bit for us, and a whole bunch of other things, and everything from you too. Let's start there for you, Ryan, because as someone that, has been watching everything here in terms of, what's being reported out of One Bills Drive, what's been the thing that's surprised you the most?
Well, from the roster perspective, I guess it's the fact that there's still some questions at that linebacker depth. That was one area where I've been really kind of monitoring it closely, where I was kind of hoping some player, one or two players, would kind of really stand out head and shoulders above the rest. It sounds like there's at least one player making a push for that, but I'll save that till we get to that point of the conversation tonight. I was kind of hoping, though, that there'd be a little bit more depth there to work with. In terms of special teams, I guess it's a little bit surprising that they already switched out one punter here and brought in Lachlan Edwards. But it still is kind of feels, at least to me at this point, that it's Bojorquez's job to lose. So, little things like that. Me personally, though, like at this point in training camp, so close to the regular season, I don't know about you, but I've been going back and forth on how many quarterbacks this team is going to carry. And right now I'm at that point where I'm looking at just 2 being on this roster. Where do you currently stand on that?
That's a great question. When I first went into camp here, I was of the belief that because of all the talent that they have everywhere on this roster, it would make a lot of sense to go with just the 2 quarterbacks, because it's weird because I know that you want to have options in a season where there's so many question marks, whether it be, somebody getting COVID, an injury to your starting quarterback, whatever the case may be, you want to have options. But I think what the Bills have been able to do, which is nice, is go out, find somebody, plug them in, and have it work. We saw that with Matt Barkley when they signed him. We saw that with Derek Anderson. Even though he wasn't very good, they were able to get by. And let's be honest, this thing's built around Josh Allen. If Josh Allen goes out, you're going to be up against it, no matter if you have Jake Fromm, Matt Barkley, or whoever. But I think that they probably end up going with 2 unless there is real concerns about somebody scooping up Jake Fromm. I just don't know. And you could talk, this would be a good time for you to talk about this. If general managers and pro scouts around the league are really judging, without preseason games, beat writer Twitter for some of their scouting reports, I don't think that what's been coming out of One Bills Drive on Jake Fromm is going to scare the Bills off from cutting him.
Yeah, 100%. Brendan Bean recently appeared on SiriusXM NFL radio when they go around and do their training camp live segments. Usually they travel to each training camp, but obviously with COVID-19 concerns, they're doing it virtually. But during the interview with Brandon Beane, he said, usually this time of year we're looking at the tape of 31 different teams in their preseason games, looking for guys that might not make the roster there, but maybe it's a position of need for the Bills, and they're saying, okay, this guy can play. They just have high numbers on this specific team. So instead of being able to look at preseason tape, Brendan Beane came out and said, listen, we have pro scouts that we've assigned teams to, and maybe it's one scout gets an entire division, or maybe it's even more than that, but they're pretty much scouring beat reporter articles. They're looking at team reports on how players are doing at training camps, looking for any maybe diamonds in the rough that are still possibly going to be cut, that maybe then the Bills can swoop in and add to their 53-man roster, or hey, this guy did really well at blank camp this year and now he's available. Let's add him to our 16-man practice squad. So it's interesting because after I wrote that article up, I thought, it is kind of funny because there was a team from the NFC West whose scout started following me recently and I didn't think anything of it. And now I'm sure that many NFL teams are doing that just to try to find some kind of competitive advantage heading into the regular season.
No, 100%. It makes a ton of sense. It's going to be funny though, depending on where you're following, hopefully you find the right sources, because I think sometimes stuff comes out and I think it's even hard nowadays to figure out who's actually in the building watching a lot of this. So that's going to be very interesting to see as well. But without any further ado, the guest of honor is in the house, Mr. Jay Skurski. How are you, my friend?
What's going on, guys? Sorry I'm late.
Not much, man. Yeah, it's okay. I hope you had a really great dinner. Where'd you go? Was it delicious?
You know what? It wasn't dinner. Sorry, I got to turn my volume down. So you're like yelling at me. No, it wasn't even dinner. It was slow pitch beer league co-ed softball, and it ran a little late. So I'm just going to be honest with you guys. All right, I'm not going to tell you it was something else, but that's what it was.
We appreciate that, getting after it on the baseball field, or softball field. I appreciate that. But yeah, we've just been talking a little bit about, some of our early camp surprises and, what stood out early on for you. I think we all go into this thing with certain expectations. What's kind of stood out to you early on and that maybe you weren't expecting with this team?
Well, I mean, I think that the rookies on offense have really look good, right? Gabriel Davis, excuse me, like he wants to go by Gabriel. Zach Moss at running back. I think those guys are really going to add an element to this offense that it was missing. When you look at last year, what they got from Frank Gore as that number 2 running back, quite frankly, wasn't good enough over the second half of the season. And I know it sounds kind of crazy to say that Zach Moss is going to come in and be an upgrade on a first ballot Hall of Famer, but with where Frank Gore is in his career, and hopefully where Zach Moss is headed, I think it can be an upgrade, and I think that's going to be a big part of this offense. Gabriel Davis, I think, has been a pleasant surprise. I do want to caution that rookie receivers usually face a pretty big learning curve in the NFL, so we shouldn't expect him to go out there week 1 or even midway through the season and be putting up big numbers. Not with who he's got in front of him with the top 3 receivers on this team. But I think, in terms of just size, speed, the combination that you're looking for, he's been really impressive. So I think offensively, those 2 guys have really jumped out to me, especially as rookies.
You look around at all of the 53-man rosters that have come out so far, and even with some of the noise that he made early in camp, people are still hesitant to jump on the Reggie Gilliam bandwagon. Where are you at with that? And could we be looking at a situation where Gilliam maybe gets a little bit of a tryout if DeMarco is not physically ready to play when the season starts? You could maybe start him off on a pup list or something like that and give Gilliam a shot. Then you can really see what you got in him.
Yeah. I mean, the longer these, this injury for DeMarco drags on, the more real that possibility becomes. I mean, I think Pat DeMarco knew what he was doing this offseason when he took a pay cut, right? I mean, that his spot on the roster was probably rather tenuous, and he thought for job security, he's going to take this pay cut. Now, the longer that he misses practice, that he stays out, the more opportunities that he gives a guy like Reggie Gilliam. When you think of what he can add to special teams, and does he have I mean, Brian Daboll doesn't use a fullback a lot in this offense to begin with, so I don't think that that's going to be a major part of the decision. To me, it comes down more to special teams, and when you got a guy with young legs like Reggie Gilliam, and let's face it, every decision this year is magnified in terms of the salary cap, right? Because it's going down a lot next year, and I think it's going to be a situation where we see guys that I've written that I don't think that they're going to make decisions based solely on salary, but if it's a determining, if it maybe tilts the scales one way or the other, I could see it being a factor. So for a guy like Patrick DeMarco, if there's a really capable younger player behind him, yeah, I think that he may feel, that push a little bit, or maybe that pressure a little bit. Now, I haven't really given much thought because, it seems like we see him out at practice that it's going to be any day now where he's back. But you're right. I mean, the longer he stays out, maybe he does start the year on one of those, those injury lists. And as you said, that would be almost a glorified extended tryout for a guy like Gilliam.
One player that was brought in recently, or somewhat recently, is Brian Winters to compete for that right guard spot while John Feliciano is out with a pec injury. So what are your early impressions on Brian Winters from what you've seen from him on and off the field to this point?
Well, I'll caution that we, are restricted as to what we can say about where guys are lining up, and I'll leave it at I haven't been blown away. How's that, right? He doesn't offer a lot of position flexibility that I can tell. He has not played a lot of center in his career in New York. Really has played mostly on the right side, even not even a lot. I know he has played some left guard, but he's kind of set in at right guard spot. And, one thing we know about Sean McDermott, Brian Daboll, Bobby Johnson is that they like their offensive linemen to be able to move around and play different spots. And I don't know that Winters offers that, quite frankly. And I know a lot of people have seen, that clip of AJ Epinesa getting the best of them last week, during what was probably their most competitive practice inside the stadium. And, you don't want to read too much into one play, but I know that is going to leave an impression among fans. But to me, it comes down to, this is a guy that's trying to learn a new offense on the fly. He had been, with another team for a long time. He was comfortable in New Jersey with the Jets. So not that he had no idea that was coming. I actually wrote, a fairly long story about Brian coming here, and, it would be a nice story. He's got some family connections to this area. It seemed like a good landing spot for him, but I think he's got work to do to earn a spot on this roster.
I think that's, perfectly said there. And I think that one of the things that's interesting is you get excited when you see all the experience right off the bat, but then you start to wonder, and it's in the comments here, why did the Jets let him go? And there might be a reason for that. He said that he feels that the shoulder is kind of getting there, but that's another thing that remains to be seen. If he's having trouble, if he's not playing at the level that, the Bills have seen on tape, maybe that continues to be an issue. And I don't know about you, Jay, but the guy that's really blown me away on the line continues to be, I was impressed with him in camp last year, is Ryan Bates. I mean, anywhere that he goes, I feel like he plays pretty well. And I'm not just talking about the one-on-ones where Brian Winters had some success this week. I'm talking about 11 on 11, wherever he is. I feel like Bates is, making an argument not only to make this roster, but if there's a chance to maybe earn a job there at that right guard spot, or wherever, because again, we can't say where these guys play. Wink, wink. I think that Ryan Bates, is doing himself a lot of favors.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about position versatility, and he probably offers more of it than I think anyone on the roster. I mean, he's a guy that truly can play all five positions. And, it's funny that you mentioned that, earlier in the summer, I had, someone ask, it was after John Feliciano got hurt, we were talking about, the possibilities of replacing him. It must have been right after, because it was before Winters was even here. And, I ran through the list of guys that they had and who I thought would be possibilities, and I never mentioned Bates. And I had somebody on Twitter kind of chide me a little bit for that and say, you're leaving out the guy who's ultimately going to get the job. And, I don't know. Well, that remains to be seen. But certainly, the Bills saw enough in him last year to trade for him, to keep him on the 53 all season. And I do think that he's a guy that, we may be underrating a little bit in terms of, what he could mean for this team at the beginning of the season. And, keep in mind the adjusted roster rules too this year, right? Where if you have extra, 55 active on game day, 8 of them have to be offensive linemen. So, it's going to be a little bit easier to make this team this year as an offensive lineman. And we're going to see more of them active. So I think Bates is a guy that's squarely in that mix, particularly because, as I said before, he can back up all 5 positions.
We'll spend a little bit more time on the 53-man, and then we'll get into some other topics that I think will be fun to talk about. But I want to talk about the defensive line before we move on. You have Trent Murphy making the roster, Daryl Johnson as a cut. Explain that a little bit because, obviously, like you mentioned in your story, there's all these different narratives on what could happen with Trent Murphy. And obviously the money that the Bills can save if they move on is not a well-kept secret. And to your point, I think that is something that we quickly move away from is what a guy does bring just at a base trustworthy level. And, Sean McDermott, he likes guys that he can trust. He knows what he's going to get when he sends him out there. So explain a little bit why you have Trent Murphy making the roster.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with I think he, as I kind of said, he's a process guy through and through. I mean, he is Sean McDermott. They basically, I think they share the same brain almost. You can't think of a guy that fits into that locker room more than Trent Murphy. I mean, there was a reason that they prioritized bringing him in, that they gave him a pretty big contract, even though he was coming off of a major injury. So, and I also think he's been, kind of beaten up here a little bit. I mean, he ended the season great last year. I mean, he had 2 sacks in the playoff game. I know the regular season finale was kind of meaningless, but the Jets were playing their starters, and he had 2 sacks in that game against Sam Darnold. Let's not forget that he started the entire time that he was here over Shaq Lawson, and there's something to be said for that. I mean, obviously, whether it's Sean McDermott or whether it's Leslie Frazier, whoever, somebody sees something in this guy that keeps him in the starting lineup, right? And, it goes back to something that I mentioned earlier about DeMarco. This is not a team that, needs salary cap space, right? I mean, everybody wants it, and it would be great, and they are going to make some decisions that I think, will be salary cap, with salary cap in mind, looking ahead to next year, but they're not looking ahead to next year. They shouldn't be. This is a team that should be squarely focused on 2020 and doing whatever it takes to win the division, to end that streak, to win a playoff game, to end that streak. And I think that Trent Murphy helps them do that. And, ultimately what's wrong with having good veteran depth, right? That is something that this team has not had in a long time. And they're set up where they've got the opportunity to do that. If Trent Murphy doesn't end up starting for this team, right? If it's AJ Epinesa or if it's Mario Addison who gets more playing time. And, we know how much he likes to rotate on the defensive line, that being Sean McDermott. If you've got 8 or 9 really solid NFL defensive linemen that you're bringing in waves, I think that's really tough for an offense to deal with. And I just have to be convinced that a guy like, be it Daryl Johnson or Mike Love or Brian Cox Jr. is really better than this guy. I know that they're cheaper. And I know that maybe long-term that they might be in the plans, but I'm not looking long-term. I'm looking solely at 2020, and I think Trent Murphy can help in that regard.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And to your point, Murphy is also outstanding at setting the edge in the run game. He was very high up there in terms of quarterback pressures last year on this roster. So maybe it didn't translate to sacks until end of the year when he had one in the Pittsburgh game, 2 in the Jets, 2 in the Texans playoff game. But he was still earning his worth, so to speak, throughout the regular season. And like you said, that rotation is big. McDermott always rotates those guys in and out. And even Mario Addison has been more comfortable on the other side throughout his career and tenure in Carolina. So, it's not just one of those preconceived notions where it's going to be easy for Addison to flip over to the other side and be as productive. So having a guy like Murphy in there that can also contribute from that side is valuable. So I agree with you. I don't think it's a cut and clear decision just because of his salary cap. From all accounts, he's having a nice little training camp here as well. He's not doing anything to show that he should be an easy decision for this team to get rid of by any means.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. I think that, somebody would have to go out there and clearly outperform him. And I don't know that we can say that, we've seen that yet.
Great stuff. And you have Tyler Bass making it. How much is that a projection? And do you feel, I guess the question is, do you still think that this competition is live here as we move through the next, what do we got now? Like 6 practices left. Is this something that could change in the next couple of days? Or do you think Tyler Bass has already shown enough? Because for me, as I'm sitting here right now, as good as Hauschka was 2 days ago, I think Tyler Bass has given them enough to give him the job.
Yeah, it's a good question. It really is one of the probably most interesting camp battles, and it's one that I really don't know who is going to win, because you can make a pretty strong, compelling case for both guys. The issue that I run into with Stephen Hauschka is last Thursday we're in the stadium. It's 70 degrees. There's a light breeze. It's perfect, right? It's you just wouldn't want to be anywhere else in terms of the weather. And he comes up short on 2 51-yard field goals, right? And what's that going to look like in October when there's a 20-mile-an-hour wind and he's kicking in that direction? What's it going to look like in November and December? I mean, the guy just doesn't have leg strength anymore. And I don't know that you can keep him on the roster if he doesn't have the ability to give you a 50-plus yard field goal if you need it, right? Now, the flip side to that is Tyler Bass. I made this analogy the other day when I was talking with Matt Fairburn on the sideline. He actually had Hauschka making it, and we were talking about this. And I said that, the thing about Tyler Bass is he is, and it works out, right? He's that guy out of college, which he is. But remember when you were trying to get your first job and you couldn't get your first job because you didn't have experience, but you couldn't, how do you get the experience unless somebody hires you, right? Tyler Bass needs experience. He needs regular season experience, big kicks in big games. And the only way he's going to do that is he's going to have to convince a team, hey, I can make these when the moment matters, right? And for the Bills, a team that's got playoff aspirations, maybe even championship aspirations, are they going to be willing to roll the dice on a rookie kicker? It's a huge, huge question. Now, there are other options. Could you try to sneak Tyler Bass through to the practice squad? Do you carry 2 kickers? I know that would be really unpopular with fans, but maybe it makes sense because you have Bass handle kickoffs and you have him maybe handle 50-plus yard field goals. It would be unorthodox, but it's an option, right? I don't think that's going to happen. I remain of the belief that this job is Bass's to lose, and I don't know that he's done that yet. I'll bang that salary cap drum. There's substantial savings with Hauschka, but to me, it's more of a performance issue. And I know Hauschka was really good at the end of last season in that playoff game, but I'm just concerned about his leg strength in Buffalo. I feel like you need a big leg to make it in Buffalo, and I don't think he's got it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And on Brendan Bean's appearance on SiriusXM NFL Radio, he actually talked a little bit about this with the host, and he said something along the lines of, I don't think we could sneak either of those 2 guys onto the practice squad just because teams are always looking for kickers. And I think that will be the case heading into the regular season. There's some teams that are out there, and Bass was probably the number 1 kicker on a lot of draft boards, whether teams needed a kicker or not heading into this year's draft. And Hauschka, while he may not have the leg strength, there's going to be some teams, maybe they play in a dome, maybe they don't have the winds of Buffalo in November, December, where they feel he could come in and be reliable. But it's going to be interesting because I do think there's a slight crack in the door, like you said, of possibly carrying 2 kickers. It would not be a popular decision by any means, but maybe if you end up only carrying 2 quarterbacks, for instance, then where once we said, okay, they're going to have to carry 3, well, maybe they only carry 2 there, and that's how they justify carrying that second kicker. Would not be popular by any means, but with everything going on with COVID concerns and things like that, it's not the worst idea to have a second kicker that on your main roster, because whoever's going to be on your practice squad, if one of them goes, they might have to sign someone to that 60-man practice squad. Who knows how reliable they would be come game day if they were actually needed.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough, though. I don't think, I think you have a very little chance of getting a guy through to the practice squad. I think it's two or it's one of them, and I think you're losing the other because I agree with you. I think Hauschka is still reliable for a team probably that kicks indoors. I think he makes the most sense. But he's so accurate from inside 45 that, that's great. And really, if you look at the state of kicking last year in the NFL, it was pretty bad. And I think one of these guys, whether it's Hauschka because his proven track record or whether it's Bass because of his potential, I think the Bills lose one of them if they try to expose one of them to waivers and sneak them onto the practice squad, which I think is what makes this decision so tough.
All right, let's switch gears here a little bit. I want to move into the AFC East because I feel like, as much as we're all excited for this practice tomorrow and we're going to talk a little bit about it, we're really coming up on games here. This is such a weird feeling to be only a week and a half into camp and really the first game be about 2 weeks away. And so, we're watching on social media today. I think that one of the, even in Bill's Twitter, the big thing of the day was just the absolute tire fire that the New York Jets continue to be. I mean, Le'Veon Bell out there going on Twitter saying, refuting reports from his head coach, and the offense absolutely just being abysmal in practice, the first team offense there, which I guess the Jets media get to report. But so I guess I'll ask you here, Jay, how bad is this Jets situation? And do you even feel like they're a factor in this division heading into week one?
A factor? No. I mean, I don't think that they're going to be a serious threat to win the division, but don't. But I stop short of saying that it's two guaranteed wins when they play the Jets, right? I think that is, and from a Bills perspective, that's sort of where where do you fall? Somewhere in there, right? Is it, can you sweep them, or are they competing for a wild card necessarily with you or something like that? I don't think they're on that level, but I also am not just saying they're going to win both games handily, right, or anything like that. I mean, the thing with the Jets is they've got some pieces. Yeah, they lost some guys, particularly on defense. In Mosley, their middle linebacker, who opted out. I think that's really going to hurt them. But I'm just not a believer in Adam Gase. That's what it boils down to. I think he is a terrible head coach, and I think that for the things that they've done right, and I've liked some of their moves, and I'm not out on Sam Darnold by any means just yet, but I think he's got a toxic head coach, a guy that just rubs people the wrong way. I mean, and obviously we can sit here and, from 450 or 500 miles away and watch what's going on and just think what a train wreck it is down there, right? And it's just because their head coach has no control and seemingly just doesn't care like what the public perception is, right? And I think that impacts them. I really do. I think this ongoing drama. You've got one of the most talented running backs in the league, and you seem like you're purposely trying to needle the guy at every opportunity you get. It's just it makes no sense. He just was the worst hire for them as a head coach, and that's why I can't really take them seriously. But I stopped short of saying that it's 2 wins for the Bills because they do still have some talent, and say what you want about, where the two teams are. And I think head coaching wise, they're miles apart, but talent wise, I don't think they're as far apart when you compare the 53 man rosters. And, it's when you're going through the Bills schedule, right, you can easily get them to maybe 12 wins, right? But it's possible, right? It's possible that they are going to just have an off week. And who's to say that doesn't happen in October when they go down to New York and play? So as bad as things look, I wouldn't totally just say that, they're going to be in the running for the first overall pick next year. Not when they've got a guy that was drafted 3rd overall and may still end up being a franchise quarterback. You can't totally just write them off that quickly.
Yeah, and there's something to be said, too, about divisional opponents and how they kind of psych themselves up for those games. Those are games that every team kind of looks forward to. So even from that aspect, but in terms of today's scrimmage, Darnold wasn't getting his full arsenal out there. Brashad Perriman, Denzel Mims out. So you're looking at guys named Jeff Smith, Chris Hogan, obviously former Bill in there as well. So, the Bills might benefit from playing them in week one based on these injuries that they have at these key positions, based on the fact that who knows what's going on with Bell and Gase. I believe the whole report out there was that Gase wanted nothing to do with Bell after he had joined. It was more so a GM signing, a splash there. So maybe there truly is something to that. But I'm with Jay on this. You can't just say it's going to be a clean sweep, just like, and I think the Dolphins actually made a lot of great improvements. I couldn't say the same thing about the Dolphins either with the Bills, saying that's going to be a clean sweep this year. There's something about the divisional factor, and there is still Sam Darnold, who can string together some impressive performances, even though we've also seen the opposite of that, where he gets into some games and he makes some terrible decisions and throws some pretty head-scratching interceptions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, division games are just not to sit here and say, oh, they're going to go 6-0 in the division. The Patriots lost Tom Brady, and the Dolphins are rebuilding, and the Jets are a mess. That is a really big assumption, right? I mean, it doesn't. That is really tough to do. I don't care where those teams are to go to sweep the division. I mean, if the Bills do that, they're in good shape this year.
Speaking of the division and contending for the division, it still goes through New England, as Brandon Beane has said, and I'm very high on the Bills' chances to be the AFC East champions in 2020. But I want to talk a little bit about what the overhaul has been in New England and what this team's going to look like in 2 weeks here, because I think that even with the reports coming out of training camp there and what, it seems like Cam Newton's starting to settle in, get a little bit comfortable. As good as this defense was a year ago, they have new pieces. They're implementing rookies in spots where, guys like Jamie Collins and Kyle Van Noy roamed last season, and an offensive line that is going to be without Marcus Cannon, without Dante Scarnecchia. They still don't have, I think, the necessary weapons, in terms of receivers and especially tight ends that they've had in the past. Where do you kind of land on the Patriots in your Boston Red Sox t-shirt?
Hey, Red Sox are in Buffalo right now, right?
I know.
First time in 100 years or something, right? Yeah.
That's awesome.
Probably getting rained out as we speak. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm of the belief that the Bills have to finish ahead of the Patriots this year. I mean, if they don't, something went terribly wrong in Buffalo, because you can't lose all that New England lost. And it's far from just Tom Brady, right? Their losses on defense arguably are more impactful than losing Brady, right? Particularly when you bring in a guy like Cam Newton, who, if he can recapture some of his form, some may argue might even be a slight upgrade on what the Brady gave the Patriots last year. Now, a lot has to go right for Cam Newton. He has to show that he's healthy before that can be the case. But with everything that's happened there, with the issues with the opt-outs that they've had, this is the year that the Bills finally put the Patriots behind them, right? For the first time since 1995, they're trying to win the division. Obviously, this is going to go a long way toward answering, at least in my mind, was it Brady or was it Belichick in New England, right? Because if Bill Belichick can somehow find a way to piece this New England roster together and get them even to the playoffs, let alone to the world, to the Super Bowl. I'm thinking World Series because you got me talking Red Sox. But I mean, if Bill Belichick can even get this New England roster into the playoffs, it might be his best coaching job. So I'm totally of the belief that the Patriots are not going to bottom out. Especially if Cam gives them something. They've still got some talented players there. Obviously, you got Stephon Gilmore. He's going to help the defense. But I don't see them as a 10-win team. I see them as a 500 team. Maybe a 9-7 team, something like that. I mean, let's not forget that as difficult as the Bills' schedule is, the Patriots is slightly more difficult. I believe coming into the season, in terms of strength of schedule, they have the toughest schedule. So if New England is able to finish above 500, I think that'll be a great coaching job by Bill Belichick. And from the Bills' perspective, something will have had to have gone pretty seriously wrong if they're looking up at the Patriots division.
Ryan, where do you kind of stand on things now here 2 weeks out in terms of, your expectations in the division?
Yeah, I think this is Buffalo's division to lose. And like Jay said, if they don't win this division, something went wrong, or they were hit with some kind of significant injuries, which happens to certain teams every year. But the Patriots, like you said, I'm saying anywhere from 7-9 to 9-7. A lot of talent there. Chung is another play that they lost in the secondary, so they're going to be starting a rookie there as well. So that whole back to the linebackers and the safeties are going to look a lot different this year because of that. The offensive line coach gone as well. Brady, you guys talked about it there. So I think that they're going to hover and compete for second place in that division, or even make a run for a wild card spot. But really, the Bills should finish with more wins than the Patriots. Miami, I've said, is still 1 year away. I like the free agent additions. I like the draft class a lot, quite honestly. But you're still probably looking at Ryan Fitzpatrick to start a certain percentage of the year. And when Fitz gets hot, he can win you games. He can lead you to victories. Don't get me wrong. But eventually, they're turning that over to Tua. And as good as he may end up being, there's going to be some growing pains there for him as a rookie. So I still think they're 1 year away. And the Jets, they might be competitive in these AFC East games and in a few games this year. But they're still, that roster needs an overhauling. And I know Joe Douglas is still relatively new there. He joined the team last year. He did what he could to upgrade the offensive line. There's still some issues there. Like I said, you look at Sam Darnold, who's year 3, just like Josh Allen. Josh Allen has a significant wide receiver trio, maybe one of the best, if not the best in the league. And then you have Rashad Perriman, and you have I'm blanking now on their Crowder,
Mims and Crowder, yeah.
Mims and Crowder. That's not close to the same. So that doesn't fall on the GM necessarily because he's relatively new, but even that they're not doing Darnold any favors there. So I don't see them being competitive either. So still think it comes down to the Bills and the Patriots, but the Bills should finish ahead of them this season.
The reason I bring this up is because I was listening to Bill Barnwell's podcast this week, and he did a rundown of where he thinks the playoff teams are going to rank. And first of all, he had Pittsburgh finishing second in the AFC, which I thought was interesting. But he was on with Sheil Kapadia from The Athletic, who picked the Bills to win the AFC East. And Belichick said, or Barnwell said, that he's picking the Patriots because of his lack of belief in Josh Allen. And I want to transition here and ask you, Jay, where has the roller coaster gone for you from what your initial impressions of Josh were around draft time in 2018 to through the whole process and where they kind of stand now on the precipice of a very important season for him?
Yeah, that's interesting way of phrasing it. I mean, I guess I'm still climbing to the top, right? I think the roller coaster is still tick, 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 tick on the way up, and then you get to the top and you kind of see, do I really like this or do I hate it? You know what I mean? Because I don't know. I mean, I guess that's my best answer. Is I'm not convinced either way that Josh Allen is going to be the guy. I mean, he's done things that have thoroughly impressed me, right? I think probably to the Thanksgiving Day game last year down in Dallas, that as a game that really stands out to me, like, boy, oh boy, that's it right there. And I know he didn't throw for 300 yards in that game, but he made the throws that you needed him to make. I mean, probably the play that sticks out to me most from last season is when he fumbles the snap. What a sloppy mess of a play, right? But he picks it up and he dives through 3 guys and he gets up and he's just so fired up, right? And that kind of infectious enthusiasm and the way that his teammates rally around him, he checks a lot of the boxes, right? But then he does things like the fourth quarter against Houston in the playoffs, and you think to yourself, I don't know if this guy's ever going to learn, right? I don't know if he's ever going to be able to be molded, right, into what they need him to be. And, the thing that I like about how Brandon Beane has built this is that he's taken away seemingly every excuse for Josh Allen this year, right? He said, you need a number 1 receiver. We'll go get you Stephon Diggs, a guy who not only is he a number 1 receiver in probably most offenses, but in terms of skill set really matches what Josh Allen does well. So you need another running back to pair with Devin Singletary. We weren't good enough in certain situations, whether it be short yardage, that kind of thing last year. Okay, we'll get you like a little bowling ball in Zach Moss, who looks like he's going to be really good in those situations, So it's on Josh Allen right now. Year 3, we have to see this guy continue to climb that roller coaster. And when you get to the top, it's got to be a fun ride, right? It can't be, oops, I made a mistake and I don't want to be on this ride. And, the one concern that I have for Allen that's outside of his control is the offensive line. I was of the belief that while it was improved last year, it wasn't good enough. And I think the Houston playoff loss in particular really drove that point home. And I was talking to my colleague Mark Gaughan about that this week, that game. And if you're an opposing defensive coordinator, how are you not just saying, I'm going to throw everything at Josh Allen and see if he can handle it? Because he wasn't able to handle it last year when it mattered most. And to me, until he proves that he can, until the game slows down enough for him, that he doesn't try to do every single thing possible and take every snap like it might be the last one that he ever plays, there's going to be those lingering questions. And the good news is, as I said, I think Brandon Beane has put him in a situation now where there really are no excuses. If he's able to stay healthy, we're going to know at the end of this season a lot about Josh Allen's future, which is interesting because 2 years in, I'm still in the, if you've got yes, no, maybe, I'm still checking maybe for, whether he's a franchise quarterback. And eventually you've got to move on from that. And I don't know that decision 100% will be made, this year, depending on what happens, but I think we'll move really solidly in one direction.
I agree completely. Encouraging signs, 29 total touchdowns last year, among the most in the league, improved in that intermediate game. But how many games did we have to wait for him to really turn it on until the fourth quarter? Because the games are closely contested. And then he could put together a drive and lead them to victory. But that's not necessarily going to be the case of what can happen here in 2020. There's some really tough matchups on this schedule. So to Jay's point, we're going to move one way or the other this year, knowing whether he's the franchise guy. No matter how good this Bills defense is, they're going to have some challenges against the Chiefs, against the Seahawks, potentially against the 49ers. And these might end up being games that are shootouts where they need Josh to throw for close to 300, if not hit that 300, which has been a big talking point on social media. And they'll need him to keep them in the game, not just wait until the fourth quarter. So this is a huge year for him. Everything is there. He has shown the ability to scramble and get away from some pressure sometimes when the offensive line doesn't hold up. That's one other benefit to his game. But I think at the end of this year, you're going to have a good idea if you're dealing with a situation where, hey, we're going to give him another year, obviously, is to be the guy, but we might have to start really recruiting and looking at some of these prospects coming out in the next few years in terms of the NFL draft and get a better idea of who that next quarterback's going to be.
I hate the narrative that guys come into the league and they're gonna be who they are. Like no matter what, there's no chance for development. There's no chance to kind of eliminate bad habits. I just kind of reject that just because I've been around sports my whole life and I've seen at different levels guys figure things out. Lights go on in heads, and so that kind of argument for me on Allen always kind of falls short when people say he's always going to be something. But there's a caveat to that. In year 3, the raw characterization kind of gets thrown out the door. Like that you don't have that to fall back on. And to your point, Jay, the excuses are gone. I mean, really, Beane has done a great job of really looking Josh Allen in the eye and saying, it's kind of like, here, do it or don't, but you have to do it. I mean, this is the kind of pressure that this organization is going to be under next offseason if Josh Allen flops in 2020. I mean, it can't be overstated. There's going to be, as good as this rebuild has been, there's going to be pressure. And you look across, across divisions and Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, the weapons that he has at his disposal. He was bad last year, but he was really good as a rookie. If he rekindles that, the pressure is going to get ratcheted up even more. So to your point, Jay, I'm kind of there with you. I'm pretty high on Allen. I've liked a lot of what he's done, but that could get turned off real quick if we get into this season here, I mean, they should start 4-0 in my opinion. I don't think the Raiders are really that good. I don't really believe in Derek Carr. I think John Gruden, as good as he was in his prime, I think he kind of leaves a lot to be desired as well. It's a road game. I don't know how that's going to affect things, and we'll see if there's fans. But I think that where things stand right here, especially the early schedule, they should get off to a fast start.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've said many times this offseason that I think this team could go 10-6 again this year and be a much better football team than they were last year, just because of how difficult their schedule is, right? And it would be interesting if that happens, because how did they get to 10-6? Did they get there because the offense took major strides and maybe won some of those games, as Ryan mentioned, that you've got to score some points in, or did they get there again because their defense remained at an elite top 3 in the NFL level and they pieced together enough offensively? I would say that would be troublesome if that's the way they get to 10-6, because again, how long is that window with an elite defense going to stay open, right? You can, and I say elite defense, and that might even be a stretch. I think they're very, very good, but to win with defense in the NFL, you can't be very, very good. You have to be elite. You think of maybe, what's a recent team? The Seahawks maybe come to mind a few years back when they were winning Super Bowls. I think that might have been defensive driven, maybe a little bit more so than Russell Wilson, or everyone always points to the Ravens from so long ago, the Trent Dilfer, for example, right? I don't think that, I think Josh Allen's further along than that, but the point being is you want to see Josh Allen in this offense step their game up, step their level up to being, I want to see a top 10 offense this year. And I know that it would be a significant jump in terms of yards and points from where they were last year, but this guy was drafted 7th overall. The team traded up twice in the first round to get him. Let's take the training wheels off, right? Let's raise the expectations to where they should be for a guy that they paid so much for and who they invested so much in, and then went out and built around that investment. They sort of did exactly what the Bills, it looked like they were doing under previous regimes, when you get EJ Manuel and you acquire Sammy Watkins, but then you bench EJ Manuel, right? We know that's not the situation here. This is Josh Allen's show. And I think the best way to say it is, we've sort of all said a variation of it, is the excuses are gone. Let's see in year 3 if he's the guy.
So tomorrow is scrimmage day, and the way that Sean McDermott talked about it earlier this week, this is going to be as close to a dress rehearsal as you can get. And he not only wants to run things through for the rookies, he said, but also new guys like Stephon Diggs. What's it going to be like in the locker room at Bills Stadium? We have to call it now. Going through the motions and feeling what it's like to feel. I mean, that's one of the cool things about the preseason games for new guys, is that it lets you kind of get used to it before the real stuff starts happening. So looking to tomorrow, after what we saw last Thursday and what we've seen this week, what are you looking to see? What do you want to see out of, it could be out of a player, out of a unit, where you want to see some progression here, in this second week?
Well, I think it would be a continuation of what we have seen with Allen and Diggs. I mean, let's face it, that has been probably the dominant storyline, or the thing that most people have focused on. What is Stephon Diggs doing, right? I mean, you see after every practice, the TV guys are running to tweet every clip of Stephon Diggs. People just seem like they can't get enough of him. But, it's a legitimate, I don't want to say concern, but I understand the emphasis on it, right? Because this guy is primed to be the type of receiver that we haven't seen here since maybe the few years that Stevie Johnson posted 1,000-yard seasons, right? I mean, this is and he's on a different level than Stevie Johnson. I mean, he is. I think he's got the potential to be a true top 10 receiver in the NFL, and without the spring, without the preseason. Not that he was going to play a lot in the preseason, anyways. But he was behind, right? And Josh Allen were behind in terms of getting on the same page. So can they do that immediately? What is Stephon Diggs versus Tre'Davious White going to look like tomorrow? How hard are those two guys going to go at each other? How much better can they make each other? I think that's a pretty fascinating thing. But we know defensively who this team is and what this team is. We know their strengths. We know, how they've tried to improve the pass rush this offseason with Mario Addison and Vernon Butler, Quentin Jefferson, and those additions. There aren't a lot of question marks defensively, right? How do they replace Lorenzo Alexander, I guess, is one. But the question marks to me are, and it goes back to what I just said, how does that offense take the jump from where it was last year, at least into the top half of the league? And I'm setting my sights higher. I'd like to see them get into the top 10 of the league. We're not going to learn all of that in one scrimmage, but let's go back to what we said we can't talk about positionally. We'll be focused on where guys are lined up on the offensive line, and will that mean that there are some decisions made there? Will Sean McDermott reveal those decisions tomorrow? I think that'll be something that's really interesting because that's going to be a really important factor. Going back to what I said earlier about improvement along the offensive line, needing to see it. That's a very real concern for me going into the season. So most of my attention tomorrow will be on the offensive side of the football and those issues.
Great stuff. And I think that, I'm really going to be watching the lines and, on the offensive side of the things. I asked Mitch Morse today, we got a chance to talk to him for a few minutes about, I noticed that, there might've been some frustration, early on in training camp with, maybe some breakdowns of protection specifically on the interior. And, Mitch confirmed that. And he said there's going to be frustrating times whenever you're going into a situation like this where, you're picking things up in July, late July. But there was times where I just felt like they weren't very good up front. And now they're going up against a very good defensive line, and defense is always ahead of offense. But I want to see if that continues to hold up. I thought Tuesday was a really good day for the offensive line. We'll keep an eye on that. But also, to your point earlier, what we talked about with Trent Murphy, I think the key to the Trent Murphy conundrum, if you will, is if it's even in the cards to move on, you have to have a very certain amount of faith that AJ Epinesa can play a significant role in the rotation this season. And, so far he's popped a few times to me. I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well, but I'm going to be watching AJ Epinesa tomorrow, how he does in 11-on-11 drills, especially if we get some extended scrimmage style looks at him tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a good point. Any rookie is going to be kind of fascinating to learn a little bit more about in a more competitive setting, which is what we're going to see tomorrow. My only concern about line play is it's so hard to, particularly on the offensive line, it's so hard to judge them when the other team isn't willingly trying to hit their quarterback as hard as possible, right? So even in a scrimmage setting, and that's one part of the preseason that I like, is that those, even if they're only out there for a series or a quarter, that offensive line has got to be on its game when that starting quarterback is in there, because the other team is coming and they're going to want to hit that quarterback. And tomorrow, Jerry Hughes, if he blows by Deion Dawkins or somebody, and he's going to pull up, he's not going to hit Josh Allen, right? So how do we truly judge offensive linemen? I don't know that we're really able to do that until the games really count. But your point about the defensive line is great. There are a lot of changes, on that defensive line, significant ones, right? And they are working in several new pieces. And there's something to be said for how quickly, we talk a lot about cohesiveness on the offensive line. Well, can they find it on the defensive line? And can they come to a rotation that makes sense for them? Certainly, I think those are things that they'll work through tomorrow, and we'll get a kind of a first glimpse at how it might look.
Very gracious with your time on this Wednesday night, leaving early with the boys, throwing a couple back on a Wednesday night to do a podcast. My man, my good friend, I'm so bummed that we're not going to have some of our fun trips on the road this year, but it's always good to wrap with you. Why don't you let everybody know where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, buffalonews.com is where all the written words are. And then just follow me on Twitter. It's I see you guys did at Matt Parrino and at Ryan Talbot Bills. I didn't know that I was supposed to do at Jay Skurski, but that's it. So just, take the space out of those two and put an at sign in front of it. And that's my Twitter symbol. So you can find me on there too.
And you could see that smile on Channel 2 as well during the season. Love the TV stuff as well. Thank you, my friend. This has been awesome. We'll get out there tomorrow, get after it again. And for all you guys, thank you for tuning in tonight. Some great numbers, some great engagement in the comments. We always appreciate you. Find Shout on all of your audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, all of it. Subscribe, rate, and review. We really appreciate it. And we will see you tomorrow. Make sure you get over to the website, Syracuse.com, NewYorkUpstate.com. We'll have you covered. Also, BuffaloNews.com as well. It's a whole new world here on the beat. Like I like the collab, man. People say that all the time. Like old school people, like, you guys seem really friendly. I'm like, why not? Like I think that's what it's all about. I like the collab.
Absolutely, man. We're lucky. We got a lot of good dudes covering the team, and a lot of guys that are doing really good work. I think Bills fans have it pretty good in terms of coverage and what's offered to them. And we certainly appreciate all the time their feedback, and we get a lot of it on social media. But in terms of the guys that are kind of trying to do that job, it's different obviously this year, but I think that there's a healthy competition, if you will, and we all know that, but we all appreciate what each other has to do, and we're there every day, and we're all kind of grinding and in it together in a lot of different ways, trying to bring news on this team to fans, and like I said, I think people are really fortunate to be able to consume it in so many different ways, and what you guys are doing with the podcast and the written word and everything like that. So kudos to you guys for doing this, and I appreciate you having me on.
My man, Jay Skurski, Buffalo News, Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. We'll be back next week. Actually, we'll be back tomorrow because we've got another practice. So we'll see you then. Have a great night, everyone.